Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Freshly Pressed. Today we have with us Benjamin Hunting. Welcome to the show, Ben. How are you
Thank you very
doing?
much. I'm doing good. I'm happy to be here. Nice Friday afternoon, kind of trying to slip into a more relaxed state of mind.
It's already Saturday morning in Australia here,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's awesome. Do you has autumn started to set in Canada?
It's kind of weird because it was blazing hot for most of August and then no rain, no nothing, just drought. And then over the last week and a half, the nights are really cool. Like it's gone down to like 12, 13 degrees at night from a high of like,
Oh,
33, 32. So I know that
oh
doesn't quite
wow.
touch Australian hot, but for Canada, it's pretty warm.
We're in the obviously it's in the southern hemisphere, so
You're starting to
it's
warm
quite
up
obvious.
over there.
It's starting to
Yeah.
warm up. Yeah, it
Yeah.
went from like, and the temperature drop is significant. So like during the day, it's gone up to like 22, 23, which is really nice and like very pleasant. But in the night, it drops to suddenly like to 11 and 10, and we're like,
Yeah.
oh, like
Yeah.
the huge drop is.
Can be depressing.
I know. But tell us a bit about yourself and pick a bit of history. What got you into comics? Your comics origin story.
Sure. So I I kind of came into comics later in life, which is both true and untrue because as a kid, I really liked Saturday morning comics in newspapers and whatnot, and I really got into like Peanuts and Calvin and Hobbes, Doonesbury, Bloom County, that kind of stuff in the '80s and the '90s. But when I don't know, I hit my teens and I never really connected with superhero comics that much. Like I'd read some Batman and whatnot growing up, but I kind of moved away from comics until I was in my early 30s. And then I moved into a new neighborhood in Montreal that had a comic book store that had just opened within walking distance, and I credit called Crossover Comics actually, and I credit the staff there who've all become friends at this point with really kickstarting my interest and love for comics again. And I started to, probably the first creator that got me back into comics was Alison Bechtel. I read like books like Are You My Mother and Fun Home, and that really showed me a side of comics I didn't know existed. Like I think that indie comics is something that is very easy to miss because it's not in the mainstream. So you have to either seek it out or know somebody who puts it in front of you. And I kind of lucked out, and that's what happened to me. I had these great people at this shop put it in front of me, and then once I started reading it, they had all sorts of suggestions as to what paths I could go down. And after that, I've been reading and not really collecting, but I'd say I'm a reader more than a collector because if I buy a book and I don't really connect with it, I don't keep it. It doesn't stay on the shelf. I give it away or I sell it or I put it in like a community library kind of thing. Um,
Mm.
but after about 6 or 7 years of reading comics, I had all these. I'm a professional writer in my day job, mostly automotive and car reviews and that kind of stuff. But I've always written fiction, and I'd written a novel that I'd self published, and I had all these ideas for stories that really felt like a visual medium like comics was a much better idea. And
Mm.
I happen to be lifelong friends with a couple of people, one whom's a designer and her partner who is a who he is a pro comics artist. And I started talking to them about some of the plans that I had, some story ideas, some narratives. And I asked if they knew anyone who would be interested in working with me on these projects. And it turns out they both were. Angela Hodge and Joe Ing is the artist, and so
So good.
yeah, it was. I did not expect that answer, because I'm sure every artist has dozens of people who are like, "Hey, I have this great idea for a book," and they try to distance themselves from that immediately because ideas are useless, right? Like everyone has ideas. It's all
Yeah.
about execution. When it comes to a
Yeah.
comic, you have to follow through and actually beginning, middle, and end, and all of that stuff. So we worked on a book called Code 45, which
Mm.
was first published in 2020, and that was published by Scout Comics. And then we worked together on another project called Dead Air, and that we started that in 2023, 2024. But unfortunately, one of my co-creators, he fell ill and he's still kind of recovering. So after two issues, we're on a bit of a hiatus with that. And I realize I'm talking a lot here, but all of this led to Model UN, which was something that I'm doing on my own with a new well, on my own. I'm doing it with a new group of collaborators, and it's an entirely different style of book. Like the
Mm.
previous books were, full color, 22 to 25 page American style issues. Um, Model UN was inspired more by manga type storytelling, with like the energy and the page counts and the black and white all coming together in a way that I felt really served this story better than doing it as a more Western type of comic book. And I'm not a big manga expert or even a huge manga fan. Like I enjoy it, I read it casually, but there's just something about that storytelling style that really grabbed me, and that's what took me
Mm.
to this project.
Mm. That's fantastic. No, great intro, by the way. And I had one thing I wanted to pick up from your intro was I really agree on the fact that indie comics have a completely different pathway to the mainstream comics. There's also like there's so much noise around mainstream comics, like there's movies coming out based on mainstream comics characters, and there's a lot of like animated shows, and like in general the characters are loved, and like a lot of people recognize them. But the thing that indie comics do better is genres, and
Mm,
because the stories are not based on an IP, they don't have to conform to a certain like a 70-year-old history of a character. So
yeah,
like people can really start fresh and write something that's really personal, or a story that they absolutely love, or
for sure, for
or
sure.
you
It's
know
it's it's crazy how,
yeah.
like, you talk about personal. I feel like personal memoir is like 35% of the indie comics that I see, whether it's overt, whether people are like, "Hey, here's my story," or whether it's like lightly disguised as a personal memoir. So yeah, definitely. You don't see that in the mainstream.
Absolutely not. Yeah, 100%. And also, I think like it's harder to do in mainstream, like a lot of the characters in mainstream comics are very larger than life.
Yeah.
Not saying that like indie comics characters are not, but and shouldn't be, you know, but but like these characters have a certain traits that you actually can't change, or ideally shouldn't change. But yeah,
Yeah, it's
that
it's limiting, as you mentioned before. It does put limits. I mean, so I personally think limits can create interesting storytelling, but at the same time, it's going to be the roadmap that you are forced to stick to. It's for my book, there's definite. I put a couple limits on myself because, again, not a manga expert, so I'm like, all right, this isn't going to be an ongoing series. I'm going to try and tell this story in 100 pages, maybe 120 pages. So this is the first half that I've done so far, but I felt like that limitation really forced me to make choices. And when I first started the book, there were many characters, and as I was writing it, I realized, well, I can't do them all justice within 120 pages. It's just not going to happen. So I cut things down, I reduced the scope, and when you do that, I think it gives you a chance to drill down into characters more, and not necessarily rely on the plot to develop characters, but like give each character that the reader meets is going to have more of a personality, I think. So that was
wow.
a fruitful aspect of forcing myself into a box.
Mm. No, I think as writers, it's sometimes you have to do that, because I personally really get self-indulgent when writing my both my characters and the story, and I don't realize I got there's always I always need like an editor to tell me that's the part where you just got like you're just meandering, for next 20 pages.
Editors are super, like, editors are helpful in a way that I think maybe people who aren't writers don't understand, because too many ideas is a bad thing, and especially
Yeah,
if they're not focused. And like, I've had editors come in and tell me that there's a part of the book that I really love that doesn't make sense. Like, it's great, but it has nothing to do with the story. It doesn't
yeah,
help. It's you had all this momentum, and then this happens, and all the energy drops out. And it's hard, because, like, for me,
it
I love
is.
it, but it doesn't mean it's good for the story, right? And you need that
Yeah,
external perspective to kind of shine some light on the story in a way that you never would have see it from an angle that you never would have seen it.
yeah, yeah. When I first started, like I wanted to start writing short stories first, because obviously the length is is very friendly. But I was reading some advice from because I was reading Stephen King's On Writing. That's obviously
Okay,
one of the,
I read that last year for the first time.
it's such a good book. It gives you so many good golden nuggets on how to think. But the biggest advice was from Philip K. Dick, and
One of my favorite
he tells
writers.
he's such a beautiful writer. I just
Amazing.
love his work. Yeah. And Philip K. Dick, on short stories, he says that do not flesh your characters. Do not
Mm.
go ahead. Like, your character traits should be like, you should define like two character traits that people see over the course of your short story. If you're doing it like 2 or 3 page story, and that just plays out as part of the plot rather than you know
Because you don't
you
have the room, you don't have the time.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that like, once you box yourself into those constraints, it just gives you such like, it forces you to think in a way that, okay, yeah, I have to start story somewhere in the timeline and end it somewhere in the timeline, and people have to fill the gaps of before and after of that. And
Yeah.
that's your short story. It's such a beautiful way to think. It's
And it's
yeah.
it's it's fun too, like, I think, as a short story reader, to fill those gaps. If you do it right at the end of the story, they want to know more, and their imagination takes over and finishes what you didn't put on the page. And I think it's a cool way to interact with the reader, even once the final word has been written, and there's nothing more to say.
Exactly, exactly. Awesome. Let's get into the book. Tell us a bit about. Obviously, you've told a little bit about the story, not story, but the book, how it came about. But tell us a bit
Sure.
about the story without spoiling it.
so so I had this, while I was after the previous comic I was working on. I had these two words, model UN, in my head just for like 6 months. It was just sitting there, and at first I was kind of thinking, it would be cool to do like a Freaks and Geeks, like, slice of life type of story about these kind of nerdy kids. Maybe they're misfits at a school, and they're in a model UN club, which I never had the chance to do that in high school, but it always sounded cool. And I was like, oh, it'd just be, what it's like for them on their day to day. And then I started thinking, well, what if them being in the Model UN Club wasn't just the thing that brought them together, but it was also like a major plot point? And then I was like, what if they met aliens? Like, what if these kids, they're in a Model UN, and all of a sudden aliens show up on the Earth, and they mistake them for the actual United Nations, and they try to negotiate with these like 17, 18-year-old kids for the fate of the planet. And I was talking to an artist friend of mine, and I'm like, which of those stories sounds more interesting? And he's like, oh, definitely the aliens. Like, not a second's hesitation. Like, your other idea was terrible. This is a way better idea, and this is what you should go with. So I started to flesh it out, and I thought what would also be interesting would be to create the aliens so that the leader was so obstinate and pigheaded that they didn't realize, or they refused to admit, that they were wrong. So even though they
Hmm.
show up on Earth, they see these kids, they think that this is just how Earth works. The young ones are in charge. And when the real United Nations reaches out to them, they're like, no, what are you talking about? We've already made contact. Like, they refuse to admit that they're wrong. And so on both sides of the story, you have these kids who are way out of their element, who are like, oh man, this is the worst possible situation. I just want to graduate. And now the fate of the Earth hangs in the balance. and these aliens where everyone on the crew is like, maybe they are what they say they are, maybe they aren't actually in charge, and then the leader's like, no, I made my decision, this is how we're doing it. So you get to see this hierarchy gone wrong. And then within the model UN, you have a hierarchy of adolescence, like that teenage hierarchy where some people are inside the club because they're associated with a certain country, they think they have high status, and then there's other kids who are maybe a little more nerdy or quieter, and they're forced into the spotlight by the situation. And then you have people who thought they were leaders, maybe they were leaders in the United Nations at the school, but when the situation gets real, the real leaders are the ones who step forward and surprise themselves with who they are as characters. So I thought all of that was just really interesting to talk about in a story,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I that's what pushed me to create it.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. No, I think that's actually quite a good idea. Like it's very fresh, and it's a very different approach to you know would you call it a high school science fiction high school drama kind of
Yeah,
film
pretty
like
much. Maybe more a little bit more comedy than drama because I tried to keep it light, which isn't always easy with aliens. But I think making the leader a little dumber than he should be or they should be helped with that. Because on the world stage there are quite often national leaders that are pretty dumb,
yeah.
and you can project that type of mentality onto these aliens and explore that a little bit as well. Just because you've achieved a certain status in the world doesn't mean you arrived there in a meritocratic way. Like,
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
mean you
yeah.
deserve to be there, you just happen to occupy that position. So that was
That's
fun
true.
too.
One of my favorite comedy movies of all time has aliens. It's called Mars Attacks, and
Okay, yeah.
it's they have just gone absolute bonkers with how dumb the Earth characters are, and
You got all of those fun like 40s and 50s type stereotypes from that era of cinema. It's Tim Burton, right? Who did this?
yes, yeah,
Yeah,
it's Tim
yeah,
Burton.
yes.
Yeah,
He had a lot. He's all about bringing those types of those past archetypes into the present as a filmmaker. It's some cool stuff.
yeah, yeah. And also like aliens themselves are like they're like gremlin like characters. Like they're not like it felt like a like in his mind it was like gremlins, but gremlins are aliens. Like they're very like they're not they just don't have any like personality other than just like let's just wipe out
Chaos.
everybody.
Yeah,
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 it's just
yeah.
chaos.
It's chaos, and there's no real communication, and yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah,
that's aliens are a fun thing to put in a story because if you really think about it, aliens in science fiction are almost always us, in the sense that they're a part of humanity that we either don't want to engage with or we don't often think about. And it's a great way for us to map and project those parts of society in a way that lets us explore them in a more safe fashion, I think.
mm, mm. That's very very true. And so in this story, how are you approaching aliens? How is it different from
Well,
straight up
I
science
can't
fiction?
get too deep into that without spoilers, but it's funny because when I first started the story, I had a very specific way of presenting them, and then the artist I'm working with, my co-creator, i.e., Santiana Hernandez, he had an idea out of the blue that was like, well, what if we presented them like this? Like this seems like a cool idea. And he was right, and it was way better. It was just like a much better suggestion for presenting them. And so it added a layer to the aliens in the sense that there's a way that they see themselves and there's a way that humanity sees them, and they're not
Mm,
necessarily the same. And I hadn't considered
mm,
that kind of thing. And again, it's
that's
another way of looking at society. We see ourselves a certain way, other people see us differently, and we have to bridge that gap to communicate. So
that's brilliant.
it added
Yeah.
something to the story that wasn't there in the initial part. I mean, and that's what's so cool about collaborating is that something, even a small suggestion, can have a major impact on a story in such a positive
Mm,
way.
mm, mm. That's very very true. Do you? I remember watching, and this is one of my personal favorite science fiction movies of last few years. Arrival,
Okay,
which
it's a beautiful story. It's had me in tears at the end.
yeah,
No, no, I'm not
exactly.
exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating. I bought the Blu-ray and I'm scared to watch it again. Like after seeing it in the theater, I'm like, I don't know if I can go through this journey, like anyway, yeah, it's such a gorgeous film.
Yeah, yeah, and it exactly talks about that communication, and like how, again, like there's other parts to it where it talks about how life is not linear, but like and you could go certain ways and in your life depending on how you take those decisions, but the core of the story itself, the plot, is communication, and how the how humans and somebody, like, for example, I mean, it's the same thing about, like, I think it's an allegory for, like, sort of like immigrants and people who come from an external society to a new place, and they have a different language, and how you bridge that gap,
Yeah.
by creating an understanding between each other, going an extra mile, trying to learn where they came from and learn about them, and
Find a
uh,
common ground and then build on that common ground.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, brilliant. I think that's a great way to think. So
I
kudos to
think
you.
Arrival was also based on a short story, if I'm not mistaken. It's The History of You, I think it was called. So
That's correct.
it's cool that a short work of fiction where characters, as you were talking about before, are not as fleshed out as they would be. You're able to still use that as the bedrock for a film that in the end becomes very character based, and you're very invested in who's on the screen.
Very true, very true. But that's also the beauty of writing. I absolutely love Denis Villeneuve's work, and he's just like, I don't know. I haven't seen much better written and structured work in last few years, last, like, what, 10 or 15 years, by any working director as his. Like, the structure is always so sound, even if when he's working with, like, a big IP like Blade Runner, or like Dune, or whatever that is. uh he's when you watch his movies, they're structured so solidly, like, they have, like, um what I would say, like, they always have, like, good setup, payoff. They always have good, like, character moments. They always have, like, a good, like, a three-act structure, like you say, in the movies, and all of that stuff is all there. But he just goes so much in depth with the characters, like, it's unbelievable. Even I don't know if you've watched one of his older movies, like,
Yeah, well,
have you watched?
he's from Quebec, which is where I live, so he gets a fair amount of attention here, which is it's nice to see. It's nice to see someone from, and again, like where I live, 95% of people speak French as a first language. So to have someone come out of Quebec and have an international impact is not common, and to have Villeneuve be able to do that is pretty incredible. So like yeah, I believe Prisoner is one of his early movies. Um,
I would Enemy, actually. I don't know if you've
Enemy.
seen Enemy. Yeah,
Enemy with the where he has the double that he encounters.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
watched that
yeah.
a couple of years ago for the first time. It was extremely intense. Still thinking about that scorpion, I think.
Exactly, exactly. Even that movie, like those kind of stories are not uncommon, like, doubles and, like, disorienting visuals, and like, bending the reality, and all of that. It's not uncommon, but the way he presents, the way he works on the characters, like, you get to know you get to know the characters so intimately, like Jake Gyllenhaal's character, so intimately throughout the movie, their flaws and their, like, good traits and all of that stuff, and how those flaws come to life, all of that stuff. That whole part, like, that itself is what I love about his writing. And I feel like in Arrival he just went an extra mile,
Oh,
just
for sure,
doing that. Yeah, yeah,
for
yeah,
sure. I agree.
yeah. It was really, like, I've been putting off watching Dune movies, because I always think, like, I want to block, like, a good 3 hour window to watch it in one go. But
Mm.
with kids and everything, it's
Not an
so
easy
hard
thing
to
to
do
do.
that.
Yeah, you don't want to watch it like 20 minutes at a time on a phone. It's not that kind of
No,
experience.
no,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Awesome. More about the book. Tell us about the campaign, and what kind of rewards can people expect, and
Uh, so the campaign starts October 7th, and you can find it at modeluncomic.com. That takes you to the Kickstarter page. The For rewards, this is I've done about 5 or 6 Kickstarters so in my life, and this is the first time I'm doing digital only because I would say 80% of my readership is in the United States. And right now, there's a tariff situation between Canada and the United States that makes it almost impossible to ship books across the border because the laws and customs and duties are changing on a weekly basis. So there's just no way to plan. And I don't want anyone who orders this book in a physical copy to suddenly be slapped with huge charges when they pick it up at the post office. It's like
Yeah.
I need to be able to avoid that. So for the first time, I'm doing a digital only campaign. It's going to be available as a PDF. It'll be much more affordable for most people. I think we actually have a bunch of supporters in Australia
Ah.
who typically support us, and from Canada, the shipping is not that bad. It's like $20. It's not. It's incredible to me that it can be that affordable. There are some parts of Canada that cost me more to ship to than Australia because our mail system is in shambles. That's always
Yeah.
surprised me. But in any case, this time it doesn't matter. It's digital only. The rewards still going through the details, but there will be a tier where you can get the original script plus deleted scenes. So pages that were written and then were struck in the editing process. And in some cases, well, I'm going to provide the full layout for the book as well, the original layout. And I have alternate versions of the layout that kind of go with these pages or were ideas that the artist, Santiana Hernandez, had that we decided to go in a different direction. So that's going to be one package. If you really want to look at how a book like this comes together and what it looks like before it hits the page, there's going to be a tier where you can get my previous books, Code 45 and Dead Air, in digital form as well. We have an indie comics tier where numerous indie creators have contributed issues of their own to helps get the word out about their stories, and you'll end up getting like something like 20 different books in addition to Model UN. And that's kind of where we're started at for now. It's interesting because I'm just pulling up the campaign right now to make sure I'm covering all of that, but you never know. In the past, I've really relied on things like original art pages and
Mm.
prints and past versions of books and whatnot. And this time it's just not possible, right? Like that's not this, it's
Yeah.
a completely different type of campaign. So it's been a real challenge to come up with something interesting and that I think gives value to people, instead of just offering them the book. So
Yeah.
I don't want to overload people, but at the same time, I do want them to get something interesting. And I'm trying to walk that line. I still have the book is complete, it's ready to go, but the campaign, I still have like another 2 weeks or so of fine tuning it and making sure that it looks and sounds and has the right rewards and everything. So I'm at that stage of the campaign as we
Mm.
record this.
Mm. Mm. Sounds good. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think this is becoming more and more common these days. Like, obviously because of tariffs, and in general, like even before the tariffs started coming in, like shipping itself post pandemic was like has become so expensive.
It's
uh
true, expensive
yeah.
and unpredictable at times.
Yeah, exactly. So and like this has been a constant case. It's actually cheaper to ship to it used to be cheaper to ship to Australia from the US than from US to Canada, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's things that just don't make any sense. A lot of the shipping costs in Canada, and this is weird because you'd think it would be like this in Australia as well, because our countries are very similar when it comes to population. Like, as I understand it, most of the Australian population lives along the coast somewhere, and the
Yeah,
middle is pretty empty. So in Canada, most of the population lives along the southern border, and then everything else is pretty empty. But it's so stretched out that if you want to reach someone who lives not near that southern border,
yeah,
the cost of postage goes way up because it's a less used route. So like
yeah,
if you're mailing to a major city, you might be okay, but even then the major city could be 2,000 kilometers away. It's not, it's not great.
yeah, yeah, yeah. is St. John somewhere on? It's on the east coast,
Yeah,
right?
in Newfoundland.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's in Newfoundland.
Newfoundland. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
in. I'm kind of in the middle, more eastern, but Middle Eastern, and like St. John is one of the most expensive places for me to mail to, and I can mail to California, which is geographically more distant, for about
Yeah.
half the cost. That makes no sense. Like
Yeah.
it's but the population density in the
It's
United
also the
States,
volume, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
the volume and the
Yeah.
density, it's
Yeah.
just makes up for a lot.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm. Yeah, I
creator
agree.
creator problems, I guess. Like I would love to never, no, but like there's so much that goes on behind the scenes when you make an independent comic book. I would love to never have to think about this. I would love to just write it, work with an artist, editor, designer, finish the book, and then get it into the world. But the reality is, and you know this of course, when you're creating something that you are your only support system for it, and you have to take,
Yeah.
you're involved in every single step between that book being created and getting into the hands of a reader. And that means you have to learn about shipping, you have to learn about packages, you have to learn about insurance, you have to learn about customs and tariff rates, you have to figure out what's going on in the European Union because those rules change a lot, and it can be a full-time job, and it can be difficult.
Don't even get me started on marketing and
Oh, yeah, there you go. I totally forgot. Like, well, how do people find out that your book even exists? I read, I read something the other day that says like in America alone, 70,000 novels are released every month. And
wow,
that's
70,000.
that's insane. I'll be
Yeah.
on a website that I like, and they'll be like, "Here's 100 sci-fi books that are coming out in September that you should read," and I'm like, "100 sci-fi books that I should read?" I mean, that's great. I'm excited that there's that many books, but it's at the same time it feels so overwhelming. Like as a creator,
Yeah.
how do I even get in the door of someone's mind space?
Yeah, yeah, it's too hard, and there's way too much noise. Like and these 100 books will have like 100 influencers talking about them on
Yep,
TikTok, and
of
like
course.
yeah. I was watching some meme like the like yesterday or day before where like they were talking about are you a business owner in 2025? Hang on, you have to become a content creator as well, and it's
Yeah,
like yeah,
it's
that's the part.
every step that you take away from your writing.
Mm,
Like I think a lot about how it's been suggested to me that I should be making TikTok videos or short form YouTube or anything that's not writing my comic book, right? And
yeah,
I feel like every time you do one of these things, you're diverting energy away from the writing process, from something that could go into making the book better. And
yep.
that's a really tough choice that we're forced to make. And like as a professional writer in my day job, it's the same kind of thing. It's like, oh, you write for these magazines or these websites. Well, why do you not also have like an active video account? And it's just an expectation
It is,
that
yeah,
I
yeah,
have an infinite number of hours in the day, and that I would devote all of those hours to this one activity. And to me, it's so crazy. And I feel like increasingly I'm trying to make choices. Like I enjoy what we're doing here. I have a podcast myself. I talk about cars. I've been doing it for 10 years. It's fun. Like I like this.
yeah,
This
yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
feel like a demand on my time. But if I had to
yeah,
sit, I used to do video for cars as well. And I know what
yeah,
that editing is like. And I know how many takes I'm going to have to do. And I know all of that background stuff that has nothing to do with my book, but is going to make me feel crazy by the end of the day. I'm making a choice to not do that. And will it impact the book? Who knows? Maybe. There's no real metrics. There's no way to tell. Like that's the
no,
other. It's a black box where you pour all your energy in, and maybe something happens.
yeah, yeah, it's that's actually very, very, very true. Yeah, there's also like I think over a period of time you build a community, you build a fan base, um, and the big challenge really remains is how do you find new fans, and how do you keep bringing the same fans over from one campaign to another, or
For
one
sure.
book to another,
I was with this book. It's something that makes me nervous because it's so different from what I've done in the past, and we have a really great readership that has followed us for from Code 45 to Dead Air, but to go to a black and white manga style book like this, that's a big ask for a lot of
Yeah,
people, and I get it
yeah.
if it's not something that some of my previous readers are interested in. But we have a good mailing list, and I stay in touch with people every month, and I found that's very helpful. We used to do a lot on social media. We had a very large Facebook community, but getting in touch with people on Facebook now is very difficult. That Facebook really restricts your reach. We had something like 5,000 people in a group about our work,
Oh wow. Yeah,
and
yeah.
to reach them, you have to actually pay Facebook incrementally more amounts of money, or they don't show your posts to people in the group, which is a really crazy thing to think about. So
Wow.
it's we've been kind of moving away from social media, moving more towards the mailing list, more towards podcasting. I think where people are actively engaged. I think email and podcasting is it's an active choice you have to make. It's not like you're walking down the street and someone shouts a podcast at you while they're driving by in a car, you know? But if you're on Facebook, you get barraged all day long by these ads, these visual ads that you're so used to just scrolling past them, you know? But if you're
Yeah,
listening to a
yeah.
podcast, you made a choice to listen to that podcast. And I think that really helps people to engage with art and with independent comics or anything
Exactly.
really.
Yeah. Now, what we've found is, I think that's why the focus of our podcast is obviously the comic is there, but it is the person behind the comic. And if people get to know you, get to know where you're coming from, uh, they will relate to you and more and more, and and then also your work. And like they may not be the uh, they may not be the biggest fan of manga, but they look like science fiction, or they like comedy, or they like characters a certain way, and those treatments and that kind of thing. So they can find things that they love in your work when they know more about you, essentially. So
Yeah,
yeah.
you that's a really great way of putting it, giving people a way in to discover the work that you're creating. Like that's how it was with me and manga. I had never really manga can be really intimidating because there's so many options, and the story arcs can feel very long, and it feels like a big commitment, and it's like, well, where do I start? But I ended up what got me into it a few years ago is I found this book called Skullface Bookseller Honda-san, which is about a
Mm.
woman who worked in a bookstore in Japan, and the book was about her experiences as her day at her day-to-day job, but she had a skull for a face, and all of the characters in the bookstore had like a welding mask or like a hockey mask or something. No one had a traditional human face, and it was
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
here's a really cool way to get me into a story about someone selling books, which
yeah,
is like
yeah, yeah,
it's a really niche interest, but I was sucked in. I was like, this is weird enough for me to be interested, and it worked,
yeah,
so like,
yeah, yeah,
I never would have, if it was just I'm a bookseller, I never would have picked that book up.
yeah, yeah. There's and I kind of like what you've done here with your book is you've not fallen for the usual trope. Like, so a lot of people who even if they're writing shonen, for example, right? They make it all about action and action scenes, whereas like in manga, there's a lot of like the way you present action, and even things like speed lines and all
Mm.
those kind of things. They have certain relevance to it. Uh, if you don't fully understand uh, why of those panels and why, and why you do that, uh, those stories, despite the stories being really good, they can become incoherent. So pretty easily. So it's good that you have not like uh, fallen for that completely, and you've done your own thing with the format of your manga.
It was, I think both IE and I were learning as we went, because we met in a Facebook group that connects artists and writers. And what drew me to his portfolio was he had this really great ability to draw sci-fi interiors, spaceships, and that kind of thing. But he could also create characters with human faces that were expressive and realistic looking, in the sense that I could see their emotion, I could tell what they were thinking. And I feel like that's not necessarily something that people always have both abilities. I think that you can really, you either like drawing giant robots or you like drawing people, and maybe you don't like drawing both. So um, it was cool to work with him to try and find a style that would be similar to manga, but not
Hmm.
100%, because again, I'm not an expert. And we do have some action sequences in the book, but it's mostly stuff like, oh, the alien mothership is arriving, and that's a big production. It's not a fist fights and running and that kind of thing and space battles. It's much more, comedy based and situational type of storytelling.
Mm, mm.
And I had
Yeah,
fun
sound
putting these stats panels together for some of the characters. It was like a cool way to.
they're
I thought
pretty
it was,
cool.
it's fun to introduce them and be quirky about them. And
Yeah,
when you have a limited number of characters, you can do that kind of thing. Like you can
yeah.
have take up the space to do that. So that was fun too.
Well, Pokemon does that for unlimited number of characters as well.
If only I had the power of Niantic power behind my books, I would also have an unlimited number of characters on a million pages. It would be fantastic.
No, but that looks great. Like I really dig it. The whole vibe of the book and how you've laid it out. I really dig it. Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
awesome. Cool. I think we've come to a point where I love to put people on the spot and ask them what are the top five pop culture things you like. These can be anything from like a movie or TV show or music, anything that really inspires you or maybe kind of you know uh, has a bit of reflection in your work.
Well, so in another life, I was a rave promoter, and electronic music producer. So I
Wow.
love music. I classically trained piano player when I was a kid, and music's been a huge passion of mine. And I love a huge number of genres. But when I'm writing, I listen to a lot of techno and trance, and I find it puts me in a nice flow state for writing. So that's kind of where my mind is at when I'm creating something like this. So I say music is probably like my biggest pop culture touchstone. But
Mm.
from a narrative perspective, when I was growing up, I loved classic Star Trek, specifically the movies, with the original crew. I feel like so many of my ideas about what friendship was like, should be, kind of were drawn from those movies, which is weird to think about now
Mm.
as an adult, but it seems to have been the case. So I devoured it. I was the kid who was
Yeah.
buying all of the Star Trek pocket books and all of the guides to the Enterprise and all that stuff. And I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so the internet, I mean, it came a little later for me.
Mm.
And if you wanted to connect with other people who like Star Trek, you were pretty much going to bookstores and like hoping that you ran into someone, or maybe
Yeah.
you went to like in Montreal. In Montreal, Quebec, which is near where I grew up. There would sometimes be like a science fiction convention that I would go to, but it was not like it is today, where that type of fandom is accessible
Mm.
to across a wider spectrum. So it's a little bit more of a challenge to be into it, and I'm glad that it's not anymore. I'm glad that it's so much easier to just like things that you like. Like
Very true.
that's
Very true.
yeah.
Yeah.
You
Star
mentioned
Star Trek itself has like. Oh, sorry, you were saying.
no, no. Go ahead, go ahead.
I was just saying Star Trek itself casts like such a big shadow over the entire pop culture these days, right? Like,
For sure,
like it has like just like the original TV show. It has a very different fandom, and the next generation. Like I'm a next generation kid, so I've watched all of
great.
TNG
It's
and
so good. It's
yeah,
so good. It's
uh,
and it's nuts how like the original show was like 60 years ago now.
yeah,
Roughly.
yeah,
That's crazy.
yeah.
That's
It
really
is,
crazy.
yeah.
Like, how is it somehow still relevant? Like that. I think about that from time to time. Uh, but you had mentioned Philip K. Dick earlier. Hugely influential on my
Hmm.
writing, and my thoughts about story. The previous two books I worked on, Code 45 and Dead Air. Uh, I looked a lot at like perception of reality and how can you tell what you're seeing is actually real, and if you're sharing that reality with other people. And I really feel like Philip K. Dick was excellent at exploring concepts like that, like
Yeah,
in a way that few other science fiction writers of his period were able to do.
yeah,
So that was
yeah.
I read tons of his books growing up, a lot of the short stories as well, and still a really huge influence. And I really think an influence today on a lot of science fiction, on film and television. Like I'll be watching something and realize that the concept that I'm seeing expressed on the TV show is something that
Yeah.
Philip K. Dick wrote about in the '60s, and I'm like, this is, it's, I'm glad it's being rediscovered, I guess, but sometimes
Yeah.
you can feel like there's no new ground out there, you know.
Yeah. 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 I don't know if you've read Valis at all, but
Yes, yeah,
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 Valis just completely challenges all your all your assertions and everything about reality, your reality, and like it makes your reality intrinsic as opposed to
as opposed to objective, right? Like,
yeah.
yeah, for sure. It's so fascinating to think that, and like, are we all just islands that are interconnecting with each other and like perhaps sharing portions of our realities, but the way that we're perceiving what's around us could be totally different.
Yeah.
It's And we'd have no way to know. We have no frame of reference, right? Like all we have are our useless senses, and past that, we're kind of treading water.
Yeah. Also, like I mentioned Blade Runner previously. Do androids dream of electric sheep? That's the story. It's absolutely hilarious. Like that story is like it's so funny. Like I don't know if do you remember it or you've
Yeah,
read it, but like the distinct thing I remember about it is, and when I watched Blade Runner, that was like my original Blade Runner. My biggest complaint: why did they make it so dull and dark? And I was like, the
I mean
story is
the
hilarious. Like it's just yeah,
the quick
all
answer
character
is
acting
Ridley
naturally.
Scott, right? Like that's, I think, the answer. Like he was at that period in his life, I think everything he was producing was dark and dour and like super British, even if it
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah,
taking place in England. Like you look at Alien and it's like the most British film, you know?
it is. Yeah, yeah,
It has all of those hallmarks.
yeah,
And I think some of that, more than a little of that, carries over to the Blade Runner movie. But what I think is cool though is you get these two different works of art that I think are in conversation with each other and are both at a very high level in terms of what they're trying to say. And that's not
yeah,
always the case when you get an adaptation. So I can appreciate that. Like I'm okay with them
that's
being
true.
different because they weren't different. It wasn't like a disrespectful type of interpretation. It was a different vision based on the same concept. So I'm
Yeah,
generally okay with that, and I think that it's aged really well,
yeah.
which is kind of scary given where society's going. Like I didn't want the
Eh,
Blade Runner future, but we're getting the Blade Runner future, so I guess I better learn to like it.
very true. Yeah. Oh, every science fiction from '60s is now reality,
Yeah.
which is not a good thing. All the tech people and all the inventors were the villains, and
It's so
we're
true.
celebrating them now.
It's
So
so true. It's so true. Someone else similar to Philip K. Dick that pop culture wise has had a big influence on my writing and whatnot is David Cronenberg, who's another
mm,
Canadian director, and I feel like he also dealt with what's real and what's not, but in a more physical way,
yeah,
where like Dick was very much about illusion and of the mind, like belief systems and what your mind can cause in reality, like the reality you can create through your thought forms and patterns and interactions with other people. Whereas I think Cronenberg was like, what if your physical reality was malleable and you could alter your body, or your body was altered, and then how would that change how you interact with the world? Whether it's a,
yeah,
a movie like Videodrome, where there's the idea that these TV signals are physically transforming the people who are watching them, or The Fly, where an inventor is physically transformed inside a device and then completely alters his own reality. Or a movie like Crash, where people are being physically transformed by being involved in these automobile accidents, and that's, to the outside observer it seems horrendous and disfiguring, but to them it's building the reality that they want for their bodies. And it's just like stuff
mm,
like that. Like I like I said, I was born in 1980, so I'm a teenager in the 90s when when a lot of this Cronenberg is coming out, and it's like blowing my
Yeah,
mind. You know, like I
yeah,
I,
yeah,
I
yeah,
have no frame of reference for these concepts, right? And they're just being Canadian TV is very unlike America. We don't have any prohibitions really on what you can put on television. If it's after a
mm,
certain hour at night, it's okay. Like anything goes. So I'm
yeah,
watching these on. It's just being broadcast on television, like Cronenberg movies, and I'm there by myself in my parents' basement, and I'm like, okay, I don't know how I feel about anything anymore. You know, this is completely rewritten my source code. So that was pretty formative when I was a teenager.
yeah. We have. I grew up in India, and I think India in the '90s was very much like that. Like now, it's very different. There's lot more restrictions and everything. But like back in the '90s, they were just broadcasting anything after like say like 10 p.m. or 11
Yeah.
p.m. Yeah, and then not just like we had because India used to be ruled by the British. There's a lot of British influence in the TV, but '90s was when like the American and Canadian TV were just invading.
Okay, so
Uh,
you were getting like a
it
just a
was
deluge of like, yeah, I can
everything.
imagine. I can
So you
imagine.
you watch like a beautiful British movie, and the next thing would be like RoboCop, and the next thing would be like
that was similar. So like Canada is the same thing, right? Like the British influence. So you would watch some British soap opera or Doctor Who or something like that, and then it would be like Terminator 2 or like Alien 3, a completely incomprehensible movie, like
yeah,
just being
yeah,
brought.
yeah,
And where I was living, because of the French speaking culture that I was in, a lot of these movies, some of the channels, it would be dubbed, so it would be even more surreal. I would be watching, like, I remember specifically watching Alien 3 in French, and it adds this layer where as a teenager, I'm still learning the language. I'm paying more attention to the visuals than I am to the dialogue, and so I'm being drawn into like this David Fincher world of
yeah,
of darkness and uncertainty. and
yeah.
and and years later I realized that, like, that's not how most people saw Alien 3 for the first time. They saw it as it was, well, not as Fincher intended it, but as the studio intended it. So it's just
Yeah,
these weird quirks that, like, when we're growing up, these chance encounters we have with media, they can
I
really
know.
resonate like later on.
Yeah, there's there's a that you brought a beautiful point. So a lot of movies that we watched in theaters were actually dubbed in Indian languages, and it always like I obviously like I was proficient in English enough to be able to understand everything, but the thing is, it was always very disorienting to see people moving their mouths a certain way and saying something else,
For sure, for sure.
and the dubbing writers, the people who would write the dialogue, would just add so many like local references, like including the songs, and like they would just there's so much lost in translation there.
Yeah, it really
uh
changes it really changes the story, and then but that becomes your version of the story, right?
yeah, yeah,
What you see the first time, it's inside of you, and then, like, maybe years later you see the original, and it feels foreign and strange, and you're like,
yeah.
what's like, I don't remember this scene,
That's
or
not a memory I have of this
yeah, it's
movie.
like so different, and yeah, and I think that it's cool that, like, we both had these experiences, and I'm not alone. Like, it's it is something I think about, though. Like, culture is not one thing, especially now.
Yeah,
There's no monoculture out there anymore. It's like we all interact with it
absolutely.
in our own ways, and, like, we have this weird bedrock that we base our interpretations on, that comes from the experience we had when we were young. And
Yeah.
like, another thing for me is, my parents were great, raised me well, but they were really strict about what I watched on TV when I was a kid. Like, I could watch, like, public broadcasting or Canadian broadcasting, very, very, before I was a teenager, before Cronenberg ruined my mind. It was pretty tame stuff. And so, like, I don't have this, like, there's a whole era of television that I can't connect with. Like, I've never seen an episode of Alf, or, like, Different Strokes, or these American sitcoms that were very popular, and a lot of my friends
Mhm.
had seen them, and I just haven't. Like, it's like a black spot in my cultural memory, and it's part of, I think, what makes me tell the stories I tell now. Like, it's definitely influencing the stories that I tell, and in ways that I'm probably not even conscious of. You know, it's like things you see, things you don't see. Everyone's an individual. Everyone has their own influences, and I think that's
Yeah,
fascinating. And that's why we
yeah.
have so many cool indie comics.
That's very, very, very true. I 100% agree. Awesome. Where are we at number three? We finished three, right?
Oh, let's see. We did
Yeah.
Cronenberg, we did Philip K. Dick, we did Star Trek. So that's two more. In this book, definitely Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Um,
Ah.
I loved the show when it first came out. I loved the show 10 years later when I rewatched it. I love the season 8 and 9 comics that they did at Dark Horse. I thought those were really good. It was fascinating to see how the Buffy stories could be told with an unlimited budget, which is pretty much what comic books are if you want to equate them to television or movies. You know, you can put a 300-foot monster on the page. You can't do that
Yeah.
on a Warner Brothers show, or you can do it once, I guess, and that's your one episode. But um, in any case, I really liked. The show was important to me. It sucks what came out later about the creator and how he turned out to be a terrible person, but
Yeah.
the other people who were involved, I think, just extremely influential on the way I thought about storytelling. And I set a lot of my stories in the 90s. And the Model UN is set in the 90s. I hadn't mentioned that earlier, but part of that is because, like I mentioned, that's when I grew up. I'm comfortable with that. I went to a pretty stuffy British style boarding school. I wasn't a boarder, I was a day student, but it was not a great experience. I hated it. I hated every moment of the 3 years I was there.
Yeah.
And being able to kind of take that experience and make something good from it is something that I tried to do with Model UN. Not focus on the bad times that I had there, but more poke fun at aspects of that school experience that were not great. And tying it back to Buffy, one thing I think about a lot is that if you look at TV shows from the 90s, there are so many plots that would not have existed if cell phones were around, because almost every show was like, people are in danger, Buffy needs to help them, but she doesn't know where they are, right? It would be so different if Buffy was like texting, "Hey, where are you?" And they're like, "Vampire attacking, come help us." And then the show is over. Like, it's a 10-minute show. It's very, very different. And
Or track my iPhone and then done.
yeah, exactly. Drop a pin and this is where we're being devoured. But, like, when I read a story in the 90s with no phones, I get to have that world where I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry about
Yeah.
someone Googling what are aliens. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it frees you. It's a restriction, like I mentioned earlier. It's a restriction in one way, but it's a restriction that frees you from a storytelling perspective. It takes you out of the framework of what we live today. And to be honest, the world today is kind of crappy in a lot of ways. And I'm just more interested in telling a story in a period that I think offers me more opportunities to be interesting. I don't I don't want to talk about social media. I don't want to talk about cell phones. I don't want to talk about, pervasive corporate influence over the internet. It's just not what interests me. I deal enough with that in my day-to-day life. I don't want that to be the fantasies and stories that I'm creating for comic books. So
Yeah.
I'm lucky that I grew up then, so I have a good frame of reference. The artist that I'm collaborating with, my co-creator, he's a little bit younger than I am, so it was interesting as well to like have conversations about how things should look and like what kind of hairstyles actually existed back then. Some of the original styles he came up with the students were way more aggressive than what you would have been allowed to do in the 90s. Like going
Yeah.
to school
Yeah.
with like a mohawk, not going to happen. Not at this kind of school. It's just
Yeah.
no thank you. So the fashion and the technology that was available to them, it's a fun limitation, I think, for these
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah. And even for the characters, if you think about it, like 80s was such a good time for like science fiction movies, and
It's true.
yeah, I think like they'll have a great frame of reference with the ET and whatnot, like as like their current pop culture or more recent pop culture.
For sure. It's like
Like,
it's almost like the 50s and the 80s were the two decades where people were most obsessed with aliens in pop culture.
yeah,
I don't know why that happened. Like the 60s, not so much. The 70s, a little bit. You had Close Encounters, you had Star Wars, but Star Wars is not really an aliens movie. It's an adventure movie,
no,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
like
yeah,
then in the 80s, everyone got full paranoid. You get like you said, E.T. You got the Aliens sequel. You got Howard the Duck, which is somehow an alien movie if you really think about it. Just like
Yeah.
strange narratives that started coming out. That leaves me with
Yeah.
one more pop culture thing. I'm really trying to figure out what that might be. Uh, well, if we tie it back again to Model UN, definitely late '90s, early 2000s teen movies like Can't Hardly Wait and Bring It On and She's All That. I
Oh yeah,
thought,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, those were especially Can't Hardly Wait because the characters in my book are a bunch of misfits and they're in this club together because they're getting the extra credit, they want to graduate with honors or whatever.
Yeah.
But each one of them's there for their own reasons. Some people want the credit, some people just have to take it. And I think about a movie like Can't Hardly Wait, where it's a party at the end of the year, and you have all of the characters together in one place, but they're not all friends. They're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
all buddies. They don't necessarily spend time with each other outside of that circumstance. So it's a
Yeah.
way to put disparate personalities and people who maybe don't know each other and haven't communicated before in a room, and then you shake the room up. In this case, I shake it up with aliens, and
Yeah.
you see what comes out. So it's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's fun to do that. I enjoyed those movies when I was a teenager. I've tried rewatching them as an adult, and like some of them are really bad, and some of them hold up, but it's just like culturally, the things that we were putting on the screen back then are a little embarrassing sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's yeah. Late '90s and early 2000s was like the era of like teen comedies and
American
all the
Pie, Freddie Prinze
American Pie.
Jr. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. And yeah, they're unwatchable today. Most of them
I
are.
wonder though, is it because we're older, or is it? Do you think like if younger people, like if teenagers today watch them, I wonder how they would react. I don't know.
That's true. I would say like we are embarrassed because I think we grew out of it,
Mm,
and we know now good from bad. But I think teenagers these days would feel like they would be more cringed than embarrassed. Like they'll
I
be
think
like,
you're right.
yeah, yeah. I don't think they'll hate it, but it'll be more cringe for them, I would say. Yeah.
I feel like it's maybe similar to when I would watch like 16 Candles or like Say Anything. Like I was a teenager in the 90s and I'm watching these 80s teen movies, and
Yeah.
it feels
Yeah.
I can't really relate to it. Like I mean I was alive in that period, but the fashions and the way of speaking are so different even 10 years later. So now we're 25 years past the 90s, and
Yeah.
movies like I feel, I think Can't Hardly Wait holds up. Clueless is a good movie that holds up from that era.
Clueless is definitely,
Just
yeah.
a well-made film. If your film is solid, people are going to find a way to engage with it no matter how old it is. But
Yeah.
so much of what was made in that period was clearly disposable entertainment. So like it's
Yeah. Yeah.
harder to get into it now.
No, there's definitely movies that's why there are like sequels or like remakes of some of these movies, like Mean Girls, and
Mm,
like even because they're still like they're talking about relatable problems, right? Like even
yeah.
things like other movies like Freaky Friday, or they're like what was the movie? I'm just trying to remember. 10 Things I Hate About You.
Yes.
That's a movie that I think every generation will like, because they're like not about the dressing or anything, but it's just the attitude of the people, and the story is is slightly deeper than just at the surface level of like a
I mean, it's
love
Shakespearean, right?
triangle.
It's
Yeah,
it's the
yeah,
Taming of the Shrew. So it's like a story that has already lasted for however many hundreds of years, and now it's getting its latest retelling, and it works in a new context. Yeah.
yeah. So some of these movies will survive, but a lot of them won't. So I don't.
Only inside here. Only the people, those of us who have seen them and still remember them for whatever reason.
I know, I know. Not many people will remember, like American Pies and all, and what the road movie, or whatever that is. Not
Euro
road
trip,
trip,
road trip. Yep.
Euro trip, road trip. Yeah, those movies won't be remembered after like 15 years or something.
It's crazy to think. I think I need to rewatch Euro Trip again because it's like There are obviously movies from my childhood I will not rewatch because I enjoyed them as a kid. I know I won't enjoy them now, and I don't want to ruin the experience. But there's some movies from my teenage years where I'm just too curious and I want to go back and like see what's going to
Yeah,
happen. And then there's
yeah.
movies like, Bring It On, which I really loved, and there's like five sequels that I've never heard of. But I'm in a video store and I'm in like the discount bin, and there's like Bring It On 4, and you're like, what? And everyone looks the same age, And I'm like, what's going on? Like, was this story universal enough to echo through the decades? Yeah, apparently so.
Wow, wow. Awesome. Cool. That's awesome. That's all five. We're coming close to time, but before we go, I would love to give you the stage and do an elevator pitch of the book. Why should people back it? And yeah, just take it away.
Sure. So Model UN asked the question, what if you were in high school and aliens showed up at your high school and made you decide the fate of the entire planet, and you tried to get out of it, but they wouldn't let you get out of it, so you're stuck with that decision. It's a small group of misfits who are placed in this difficult position, and they have to work together and deal with a group of aliens who are honestly a little bit too stubborn to admit the fact that maybe they're wrong and maybe this isn't the actual rulers of the earth. But it doesn't matter because they've got a schedule to keep and they really have to get moving. So I think you'll like it if you like teen comedies, if you like absurdist kind of comedies, or if you like science fiction and all of those things together. If you enjoy a manga style of storytelling, not so much in the action, but just in the way manga can structure a story where you get to know the characters, and the plot and the characters are, they're equally as important. It's not really a high concept type of story. It's more about people who are in a certain position and have to deal with those circumstances, and the way they deal with them is it's dependent on each individual. And that's something that's really interesting to me as a storyteller. And I also like to have fun and stuff as many jokes in there as I can. And Aliens let you do that because they let us show parts of humanity that are funny or weird, or maybe we don't like to talk about, and we can push them off onto another and then have us conflict with that other. So that's my pitch for Model UN. You can find it at modelun.com. That will take you to the Kickstarter page. It goes live October 7th. We're going to do a 30-day campaign, and I would love it if you signed up to be notified because that super helps us out with the algorithm on Kickstarter. I
Done.
appreciate it. Thank you. You're part of the solution.
Awesome. I the whole time I was actually trying to remember what this image looked like. I remember the cover for a movie called Attack the Block.
Oh, that's a
Starring
British movie with
It's a British movie, John Boyega.
yeah, one of his first movies.
Yeah.
I recommended that movie to my sister this week because she had watched a movie called Vampires versus the Bronx, and it's the same idea except instead of aliens, it was vampires. And I'm like, you're
Yeah.
gonna love this other movie. It's just as good. Yeah, that's an interesting point. This was colored by our colorist Maya Opechik. She's done a
Mm.
few of our other books. She's really great. But
Oh yeah.
what I liked is how IE came up with all the main characters are there. The alien ship is there. It's dramatic, but the person in the middle looks really really worried, and that's I think the vibe of what's happening. It's not a heroic vibe. It's a, oh no, what do we do now?
Awesome, awesome. So yeah, we're closing now, and thank you for coming on the show, Ben. I really appreciate it. I had
Oh,
such a good
thank you
time
for the
here.
time. Like, again, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about the book and everything else. I had a great time.
Awesome. To all the viewers, do check out the book, do check out the campaign, and all of Ben's work from previously. So thank you again for coming on the show, and until next time, stay good.